This video is on the question of Germany's place in Europe. Now, Mynoon did an excellent video response, and we're not even debating about whether Europe or the euro currency is viable or that we should have a united Europe. We're debating about whether Germany's place in Europe unbalances Europe, whether the Germans have an economic domination of Europe, which Mynoon focused on in his video. And what are the reasons for this? Well, we can blame the Germans on one level because of their arrogance towards Greece. And I am very pro-German, but I'm not naive about the Germans and their insecurities and the arrogance that comes from that, because of the feeling of being closed in on all sides by foreign countries. It's much in the same way as the English feel about the threat of the Welsh and the Scots in the Middle Ages in Edward Longshank's time. But enough of this. Let's continue. The Germans, Mynoon rightly said, are using other countries to bail out their banks. But were German banks making mistakes in the same way that British banks did, that Italian banks did, that Spanish banks did, and Irish banks did in loaning out the money in the first place? Uniquely, Europe cannot blame its central banks. The Bank of England can rightly be blamed in some respect during the early 1990s to early 2000s of having an expansionist monetary policy, especially after the Labour government of Tony Blair gave away independence to the Bank of England. Now, the central issue of the crisis, the financial crisis, let us not forget, was not that people overspent too much on single parent mothers, or as David Cameron would have us believe, but because the Federal Reserve issued too much money too fast and created a property and housing bubble which was unsustainable. In a similar way, the ECB is in an unsimilar way, the ECB has been monetarily and fiscally responsible, but the member states, the governments, have not. Spain has created a huge property bubble which went bust. Ireland's consumers, uniquely, not just with the Americans' consumers, but uniquely with the Irish, overspent because money was too freely available to them. Whereas the Germans were not. The German citizens were saving in the same way that the Chinese did and the Japanese do. They're more likely to save than other Europeans. So, are the Germans being Machiavellian, or are they just being prudent? This is the crux on which this debate between myself and Jeremy, Mynoon1999, rests. He will say that they're being Machiavellian and using Europe as a stepping stone, and I'm supposed to say no, of course they're not. But actually, I do believe that Germany has some cynicism towards Europe, especially on the right in Mrs. Merkel's case, because she is conservative and perhaps she's playing more. She's in a coalition with the Liberals, which in American terms means left wing, but in European terms means right wing. That's neoliberals. And they are playing the anti-European card and playing the nationalist card also, because of the Bavarian, the sister party of the CDU is the Bavarian Social Democrats, which is actually a quite centre-right party. The Bavarian Christian Democrats, which is actually not Social Democrats, which is actually a centre-right party. There's also a major debate in Germany within itself about the Stuttgart Railway, which is a major political milestone in that the Greens attained an election victory over Mrs. Merkel. So the government within Mrs. Merkel's government does not feel so secure as it used to, and so she might be playing to the crowd. I'm a Social Democrat, so I would prefer the Social Democrats, that's the German Labour Party, to be in power in Germany. Perhaps they might be more pro-European, but Mynoon1999 was right to say that that he doesn't like Mrs. Merkel. I would prefer someone else, but I think she's been right on many issues as well, because she is guided much the way that Herman Kohl did, Chancellor Kohl did. Gerhard Schroeder has carried on that same policy, even though he's a Social Democrat, and then Mrs. Merkel has carried it on, of having Germany as an export and import leader in Europe, and not just in Europe, but throughout the world. Now, does Europe count? The question is not does Germany count in Europe, but does Europe count without Germany? Arguably, the non-inclusion of the Germans in the Roman Empire was one of the reasons for their fall, because of the creation by the English of the Alemanni Alliance, and then when Germany attained maritime supremacy over the Romans, that the English then moved to Britain and created England. That was a major feat of diplomacy and military strategy. But can a maritime Germany emerge? That'll be I'll carry on and talk about that in a second. But the problem is that Germany itself cannot be contained by Europe, but yet Europe, just led by France and England, is not going to be a world power to rival China and America. Now, of course, the friction between Germany and England and France and the Mediterranean countries is actually a dynamic force. It's not just a dialect, a tension. It's there because the different policies of those different governments have created economic imbalances, and these are trying to be exploited by the anti-European Americans and anti-European parties like UKIP. Arrogant bastards, in my opinion, but they're ignoring the possibilities. Every financial crisis that Europe has gone through has emerged stronger. So is it that the other European countries are not doing the right thing, in that they're trying to move towards the Anglo-Saxon model of being dependent on financial services, rather than the German model of balancing financial services on one hand with exports and imports and manufacturing. Now, David Cameron is interestingly he's like the anti-Thatcher. Thatcher moved our entire economy onto farming, military arms sales, mercenary groups, and also financial services. In fact, 20% of the intake of taxation for Britain is from financial services, and it's not just in London, but throughout the entire country. On there, Nigel Farage was correct. But the problem is this leaves us very susceptible to importing inflation from the United States, from the Federal Reserve, where I talked about at the beginning of this video. Now, what is important is that we create a different kind of Europe. Mynoon1999 said that that Germany can never be a maritime power, but it was once before in the migration age, when England was created. But it can be again. And if European power is to spread throughout the entire globe, then Germany needs to be a maritime power, and there needs to be, as Churchill said, a strong France, a strong Germany, and a strong Britain at the core of Europe. This is my point, and I'll be interested to see Mynoon's 99's response.